Mr. Thompson here. We're looking at U.S. History Standard 12, evaluate how westward expansion impacted Plains Indians and fulfilled manifest destiny. In particular, we're looking at Part C of that standard, explain the Plains Indians' resistance to westward expansion of the U.S. and the consequences of their resistance. In 1868, the U.S. government reached an agreement with many of the Plains Indians tribes when they signed the Fort Laramie Treaty. The provisions stated that in exchange for the land set aside for them in the Black Hills of the Dakotas, the Plains nations agreed not to harass or threaten Western settlers. The treaty was not very effective after gold was discovered in the Black Hills in 1875. Settlers flooded the area in search for gold, violating the treaty, and warfare broke out. The Great Sioux War of 1876-1877 culminated in the Battle of the Little Bighorn that resulted in the deaths of most of the United States 7th Cavalry Unit. Even though the Plains Indians won the battle, they still faced insurmountable challenges with the superior numbers and organization of the U.S. Army. The U.S. government challenged the American Indians by targeting the buffalo and wiping out the Plains tribes' main food supply. While some American Indian groups escaped to Canada, most of the surviving Plains tribes were forced to live on reservations. One of the great American Indian leaders of the period was the Lakota leader, Sitting Bull. He became a noted warrior because of the fighting between the U.S. and the Lakota in 1863. After continued invasions into the Lakota territory in 1876, Sitting Bull led the coalition of Plains tribes against the U.S. Army. The resulting conflict was the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Afterward, a large force of U.S. Army troops relentlessly pursued the Plains tribes and subdued some groups, but Sitting Bull led his people into Canada. After 5 years in exile and unable to feed his people, Sitting Bull returned to the U.S. and finally agreed to live on a reservation. About 10 years later, Sitting Bull's tribe was urged to join the new ghost dance religious movement that was sweeping through the Plains tribes. The American Indians believed their ceremony would reestablish their ancestral lands and repopulate the buffalo herd, thus restoring the Sioux's lost greatness. As some of Sitting Bull's followers were ordered to be brought back to the reservation, a confrontation with elements of the 7th Cavalry started. As the soldiers began to confiscate the weapons from the Sioux, a shot was fired. Some of Sitting Bull's followers may have been convinced that their ghost shirts would protect them as they resisted the soldiers. This tragic gun battle at Wounded Knee ended with the deaths of over 300 Sioux, including women and children. This was the last major conflict between American Indians and the U.S. Army and signaled the end of resistance to white settlers' westward expansion.